11 days. That is the whole story. Everything after it is just government adding appendixes. July 19th, Spain beat Argentina, wins the World Cup, and spends 120 minutes refusing to let Lionel Messi into a painted rectangle. July 30th, 50,000 people walk into a Spanish city because a rumor told them they could. Same country, same summer, one of those borders held. And in between, Spain did something small and extremely modern. It won the trophy. Then it published the photograph without the man who handed it over. Nobody faked that photo. I want that clear before we start. Nothing was doctored. Somebody just chose the frame. That's the enemy in this one. Not a lie, the crop. The picture that is completely accurate and leaves out the only thing that matters. Hold that word, crop. And somewhere on the far side of a fence in North Africa, there's a man deciding whether to climb that fence. This whole thing is about him. So stay with me. I'm Charlie Garcia. This is Capital Mischief. One channel that reads the ruling instead of the rumor. Subscribe, it costs you nothing, and annoys all the right people. So July 19th, let's go back to MetLife Stadium. Spain beats Argentina 1-0 in extra time. Ferran Torres, 106th minute. Spain finishes the tournament having conceded 1 goal. That's it. In 8 matches. That's not a football team, guys. That's a customs agency with a midfield. And look at what the defense actually was. The boundaries were painted. The rules were agreed to in advance. And when an unauthorized Argentine approached the restricted area, 11 Spaniards behaved as though territorial integrity meant something. Not just any Argentine, folks. We're talking about Lionel Messi, the single greatest border violator in the 21st century. 20 years crossing lines that the entire planet swore were uncrossable. A 9-figure career built on entering restricted zones without documentation. 80,000 people watched a country enforce a painted line against the best line crosser alive and called it the finest defensive performance the World Cup has ever seen. Now, 11 days later, same country couldn't hold a border against a rumor. Turns out Spain believes in borders. You just have to paint them white, put a trophy behind them, and make sure that the guy coming across is really, really famous. So now let's turn to July 30th. More than 50,000 people cross Morocco into Ceuta. And yes, Spain owns a city in Africa, has for 4.5 centuries. Morocco has spent most of them disagreeing, or pick a number. Morocco says 40,000. Spain's own police associate says 60. Press tallies run to 75,000. A crowd nobody can count within 35,000 people is its own report of the state of this border. So here's the scale. Ceuta has 83,000 residents, 118 square kilometers. Already one of the densest places in Spain. Spain took 6 weeks permitting 1 goal. Then in about 2 days, it took in an arrival equal to 72% of the city. Not 72% of the migrants, 72% of the city. Ceuta briefly ran denser than Madrid. A redevelopment achieved without a permit, a zoning hearing, or a single line in a municipal budget. Many came over land. Others found the design flaw and swam around the end of the fence because the fence stops where the Mediterranean starts. And this is where the joke stops just for a minute. People did drown. Others were crushed against the breakwater. How many depends entirely on who's counting. So the government says 72. The city president told El País the morgue received 88 bodies. The police association puts it above 100, and about 20 more recovered on the Moroccan side appear in no Spanish tally at all. So the gap between the government number and the morgue's number is itself the story. So who is he? The man at the fence, young, Moroccan, most likely Muslim from a country that's entirely Muslim, heading to the one that is Catholic. And neither of those facts makes anybody's list of reasons. The reason are on a pay stub. Spain's economy produces about 8 times more than the person coming from Morocco. Moroccan youth unemployment runs north of 20%. And Ceuta is the only place on the map where that arithmetic stands close enough to touch. He's not crossing for the cathedrals, folks. He's crossing for the payroll. Hold on to him because he is the whole story today. So why that weekend? A rumor went around that a Spanish court had opened the door. Here's what the court actually did, and it's worth a few seconds because almost everybody got this part wrong. On July 8th, a Supreme Court doctrine took effect. The state itself had appealed, trying to preserve summary returns. Summary return means sending someone straight back without processing them at all. Summary, the state laws. So the ruling said that a swimmer overcomes no physical containment element. So a swimmer cannot be summarily pushed back. And it said cameras and drones don't count as containment. That's it. That is the whole ruling. It didn't open the door. It repriced one lane in the water. Within 10 days, swim attempts multiplied. Smugglers were handing out life vests, and Spain's own Guardia Civil Association asked the Interior for protocols because its agents no longer knew what was lawful at the waterline. Now, here's the part that matters. Most of the 50,000 came over land. Where the ruling changed, absolutely nothing. It didn't matter. A repriced sea lane travels at rumor speed as a repriced border. That has happened before. In May of 2021, 8,000 people entered Ceuta in 2 days right after Spain admitted a Moroccan adversary for medical treatment. Under a fake name, of course. Video showed at least one Moroccan guard opening the gate. Flow began, and Morocco made its point. The flow stopped. Somewhere in Rabat, there was a man with a clipboard and very excellent timing. You don't have to order people across a border. You just stop preventing them, let the right rumor circulate, and then express very deep concern about humanitarian conditions on the other side. Europe's own rights agency has a term for this, instrumentalization, which sounds like something built by a committee trying to fit a moral catastrophe onto the conference badge. The mechanism is real. So here's a sentence this whole video is built on. A border is an expectation before it is a structure. Nobody moved a fence that weekend. 50,000 people moved because they expected on the other side of it. I just read you Supreme Court doctrine in Spain and told you what it did and did not say next to what 50,000 people thought it said. That took a morning and a translation, and it's the entire reason this channel exists. The full written version, every source, every link, is on my Substack. QR code on the screen right now. Point your phone at it. So, also, subscribe and like this YouTube, okay? Now, I get into how to make money. And I'm not your financial advisor, so take that into account. But we've made a lot of people money at Capital Mischief. An Australian broadcaster watched Trump on the podium during Spain's trophy celebration and said it out loud on a live microphone. They're going to edit him out of that. He understood digital diplomacy, which is regular diplomacy minus the treaty, plus a crop tool. Trump presented the cup alongside FIFA president Gianni Infantino, and he stayed on stage as the celebration started. Infantino eventually walked him off. FIFA then published a tightly framed image of the players lifting the trophy that excluded both of them. Although the crop left the edge of his suit in frame, which is the sovereignty editing equivalent of leaving the receipt in the bag. So Spain cropped him out of its trophy video and published photos taken after he stepped away. The White House answered by publishing its own images because, of course, modern government apparently requires competing national archives and pictures of who was standing near a World Cup. Then social media improved the story until it was false. Posts claimed that Spain digitally erased him from a later photo. Snopes checked, no evidence of digital removal. He had already stepped aside when that frame was taken. And the true version is far better anyway. Nobody faked anything. Spain and FIFA looked at reality. They picked a frame they liked and they published it. Governments do this every day, folks. The debt is outside the budget window. The war is outside the authorization. The migrant is outside the legal category. The inflation is outside the preferred index. The president is outside the photograph. A photograph is reality with an editor. Geography is reality without one. Spain could pick a frame that Trump wasn't in. It could not pick a map that Morocco wasn't in. Cropping a man out of a post takes software and good taste. Cropping a neighbor out of a map takes a fence, a budget, intelligence, personnel, detention capacity, diplomatic leverage, and a willingness to be called unpleasant by the same people who will demand all six the moment the fence fails. So Madrid had run short of all of those things, except the people willing to call it unpleasant. Now, Schengen. Ask a European what Schengen is, and he'll tell you Europe abolished borders. Beautiful, moving, but wrong. Europe didn't abolish borders. Europe moved them. 29 countries, 450 million people. They took 28 borders, stacked them up, and dropped them on the edge of a continent where the tourists don't go. That's not exactly abolishing borders. That's cleaning your room by shoving everything in the closet, and they wrote it down. All right. So the European Council says it in plain language. Fewer controls inside, coordinated controls outside. Nobody read it. 450 million people on one dance floor, and nobody read the fire code. So here's the deal, and it's the same deal as your house. You know why you can walk around your house naked, right? Because the damn front door locks. You didn't abolish doors. You've got one door. It works. And that's why the kitchen clothing is optional. Take the lock off the front door and see how long the naked phrase of your life lasts. A softer interior requires a hard exterior. So Ceuta happens, and Italy announces it's suspending Schengen in Spain. Suspending it sounds enormous. Then the policy comes out legal, looking like the headline with the helmet on. European citizens, you can come in. Everybody else arriving from Spain, we have some questions. That's not suspension. That's a nightclub that starts checking ID after the fight. So there's 22 European leaders signed a letter demanding coordinated action. A content with 2,000 years of military history, and the response to 50,000 people walking into a city is a letter, all right? It takes Brussels 2 years to approve a damn light bulb. A wall took the weekend. And here's the joke. Take it home with you. Europe spent 30 years throwing parties for the disappearance of all of their internal borders, adopted one currency, the euro. 30 years of ribbon cuttings, and the very first thing it did when the outside door failed was to put a checkpoint back inside the house. And notice that's 3 times now. Spain cropped the photograph, nothing faked, everything inside the frame accurate, and the man who handed over the trophy standing just outside it. So Europe cropped the border, never abolished it, moved it where the tourists don't go, and wrote it down where nobody would read it. And Spain cropped the count. 72, says the government. 88, says the morgue. Above 100, says the police, and 20 more on the Moroccan side that appear in no Spanish tally at all. 3 frames, every one of them accurate. Now let's turn to America, because somebody already ran this experiment at full scale. Start at the southwestern border, fiscal 2025. 237,000 patrol border encounter, down from more than 1.5 million the year before, lowest annual total since 1970. Correction first, because it matters. That fiscal year started in October 2024. Biden was still president. The decline had already begun under his asylum, but come on, Trump closed the border. But Pew, which is very objective, credits a little of both. But Trump gets the next number. Starting in February 2025, his full month back, encounters stayed below 10,000 every single month, the lowest monthly totals in more than 25 years of data, below even April of 2020, when international migration collapsed because most of the planet had gone indoors because of COVID and started disinfecting its groceries. Now, inside the country, and this part, nobody volunteered. Researchers at Berkeley had to sue the government to get its own enforcement records. And what came back was this: deportations following an arrest made inside the country more than 5 times higher than in January of 2026 than an average month in late of 2024. Detention beds filled by people arrested inside the country went from about 14,000 to roughly 57,000. So here's the mechanism the cable panel skipped. A border isn't one object. It's obstruction, surveillance, agents, processing rules, detention capacity, and a credible possibility of removal after you're already inside. So go back to our man at the fence in Morocco. He doesn't only ask whether the fence can be climbed. He asks whether, am I going to be detained? Will I be released? Whether the case takes years, whether anybody is still interested a year from now, after he has the job, after the apartment, after his kids are in school. A border that discourages entry but makes staying safer after arrival isn't a border. It's just unusually inconvenient admissions office. The statutes were always there. What was missing was anybody willing to pay the political invoice. The enforcement didn't end at the wall. That was the wall. Some people call it the invisible wall, which is exactly backwards. The man deciding whether to cross sees it more clearly than anything else in his life. It's invisible only on television because it isn't built out of anything a camera can actually film. And now the cost, because you pay for the filter, not the applause. That same Berkeley project found something else, an 8-fold increase in arrest of people with no criminal convictions. And it found those same people became much less likely to be released from detention. And that creates real risks, folks. The greater the speed and the scale, the greater the chance of mistaken identity, lost records, improper arrest or removal before a legitimate claim can get a serious look. So government power doesn't become harmless because it's enforcing a law you just happen to support. All right? The IRS also enforces laws, and nobody has proposed naming a maternity ward after it. So none of this proves every raid was wise and every arrest justified, every removal legally sound. What it proves is that enforcement does change behavior. That's the invisible wall. So a serious person keeps these two things apart. Today, the European interior ministers are meeting, and Europe is about to spend an enormous amount of money rebuilding something it spent 30 years explaining it had outgrown: borders. All right? Watch what they buy, because what a government buys tells you what it thinks a border is. My guess is they're probably going to buy a fence, okay? A fence photographs beautifully, but go back to where we started. There was a man on the far side of one, and he's already knows the answer. The only question a fence asks: can you get over it? Yes. He can see the water. Something else eventually made him turn around and go home. And ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't the fence.